My name is Martin Vu. I'm 61 years old. And until 14 minutes ago, I was the senior systems manager at St. Anselm Medical Center in Bien Hoa, Vietnam. For the last 17 years, I kept the hospital alive, not in the way doctors do, but in the way you never see. I built and guarded the digital nervous system that made the entire operation possible. And now, I was being replaced. The man sitting across from me was Eric Bao, 39, fresh MBA from Singapore 5 months into his position as director. No medical background. Not even a passing curiosity about how things worked here. Behind him stood Kevin Tran, a tech consultant, early 30s, arms folded, glancing at his phone, like this meeting was a formality. "We're moving forward with a cloud-based solution," Eric said, pushing a folder across the desk. "You'll find the terms of your severance, 3-month salary, and a non-disclosure agreement." I nodded. It was clear this decision had already been made weeks ago. The badge clipped to my chest felt heavier with every breath. In all those years, there had never been a single system failure on my watch. Not during the ransomware attack of 2019. Not when the entire regional power grid collapsed in 2021. Not even when I lost half my staff due to budget cuts and held everything together working 80-hour weeks. "Security will escort you to gather your personal items," he added, "and we'll need your access credentials today." I unhooked the ID badge and placed it on the desk. My voice was steady. "Master credentials are stored in the encrypted drive. Fully documented." For the first time that day, Eric smiled. "Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable. Change is difficult, but necessary." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. As I stood, Kevin Tran was already walking toward my desk, toward what used to be mine. He hadn't asked a single question about our infrastructure during his 3-week evaluation. Not one. "Is there something else?" Eric asked. There was. I could have warned them about the pharmacy integration patch I'd written myself, or the legacy patient record handshake that only worked due to a customized bridge I designed over 2 months of unpaid weekends. I could have told them about the offline failover triggers that needed to be manually reset every 90 days. But I didn't. No, nothing else. I walked through the hallways like a ghost. Past the ICU nurses who called me at 2 a.m. Past the scheduling desk where I rebuilt the database from scratch after a major corruption. Past 17 years of service so seamless. It was invisible. In the parking lot, I placed a cardboard box in the passenger seat. My daughter's photo, a chipped coffee mug from our network upgrade week, a stress ball shaped like a heart. I didn't look back. They didn't want my knowledge. They wanted my absence. A week passed. The first message came in from Alan, one of the younger techs. "Hey, Mr. Vu, can you remind me where the prescription backup files are stored?" Then Trang from database admin. "I think I found the config file for the pharmacy bridge, but it's encrypted." "Did you leave a passphrase?" I said nothing. The severance contract was clear. No outside assistance, no unauthorized access. But it wasn't relief I felt. It was certainty. They didn't understand what they'd done. The systems at St. Anselm weren't just machines. They were layered living organisms held together by years of trial and error documentation. And care. Yes, I left behind hundreds of pages of technical manuals. Yes, every backup process was written down. But knowledge isn't just written, it's lived, it's felt, it's earned. And they had no one left who understood how the pieces truly fit. 2 days later, the calls started coming in directly. First Eric's number, then Kevin's. I let them all go to voicemail. "Martin, just a quick question about the diagnostic platform. We've got some instability in the patient record system. Please call back ASAP." I poured myself another cup of coffee. Later that night, I got a call from Dr. Lin, head of cardiology. Her voice was steady but tired. "Martin, we had a trauma case this afternoon. The ER couldn't access any of the patient's historical data. It took 40 minutes to confirm a medication allergy." "No one was hurt," she added, "but it shook everyone. They're talking about going back to paper for now." I closed my eyes. Not revenge, not satisfaction, just clarity. I didn't want things to break. But when you spend your life making sure they never do, it's easy to become forgettable, invisible. I gave up vacations, birthdays, even my daughter Mai's university graduation, just to make sure that systems didn't crash. To ensure doctors could focus on saving lives, not troubleshooting screen freezes. "You kept us running," Martin, my late wife, once told me, "even if no one ever sees it." She was right. But maybe it was time someone did. 2 more days passed. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from the hospital IT team. Questions about scheduling conflicts. Login errors. Missing treatment protocol files. They were unraveling faster than I expected. And I said nothing. Not because I wanted them to fail, but because I had warned them. Quietly. Repeatedly. In emails they never answered. In meetings they barely looked up during. They didn't fire me because I was obsolete. They fired me because I was in the way. You see, what they really wanted wasn't a modernization plan. They wanted a blank canvas. They wanted to tell a story that didn't include me. And they couldn't do that while I was still there. I remembered the last real conversation I had with Dr. Tree, the old hospital director. He once told me, "The best systems aren't flashy. They're invisible when they work. But when they fail, people die." He understood that uptime wasn't just a number. It was a heartbeat. After his retirement, the board brought in Eric Bao. And from the very beginning, I saw the signs. He never showed up to system briefings. Never once asked about platform dependencies. Didn't care about the pharmacy interface we'd hand-built because no vendor solution could integrate with it cleanly. And then came Helix Solutions, a name that sounded impressive. A company with glossy brochures, bullet point promises, and a playbook they insisted worked everywhere. Except it didn't. Not for St. Anselm, where our systems weren't plug-and-play. They were handcrafted, layered, and deeply interdependent. Still, Helix offered cost-cutting projections the board couldn't resist. And Eric, he was promised a performance bonus if the transition stayed under budget. So when I was labeled inefficient, it wasn't because anything had failed. It was because my presence contradicted the narrative they were selling. They wanted a fresh start, and to do that, they needed me gone. By the end of the week, I had received 14 missed calls from the hospital. On Monday morning, the subject lines of the emails changed. Critical issue with oncology workflow, lab diagnostics queue frozen. Request for immediate assistance. Still, I didn't respond. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my notebook. A contact I'd kept for years, Jang Thu, director of technology at Riverside Medical Center, 1 province over. She'd offered me a role 3 different times. I had always declined. Not because the offer wasn't good, it was, but because I still believed that loyalty mattered. Now I wasn't so sure. So I picked up the phone. "Martin," she answered. "I just saw the news about St. Anselm. Are you okay?" I told her I was fine. Tired, but clear-headed. And that if her offer still stood, I was ready. "It does," she said. "And you'd be joining as Chief Technology Officer." I accepted. That night, I finally listened to one of the voicemails from Eric. His voice cracked with stress. "Martin, please, we're having trouble with the diagnostic bridge. No one seems to know how it's supposed to connect to the new system. Can you just call me back?" I didn't. And I didn't feel triumphant, only resolved. They had gambled with lives, with patient histories, with safety nets they didn't even know existed. And for what? A cost-saving contract and a clean spreadsheet. 3 days later, Dr. Lin called again. "They lost access to the radiology archive for 4 hours yesterday," she said softly. "We had to cancel 2 procedures. And today, insurance verification went down. They're trying to run admissions manually." "I'm sorry," I told her. Because I meant it. This wasn't how I wanted things to unfold. But it's what happens when you mistake efficiency for wisdom. That evening, I found an old photo on my shelf. My daughter Mai at her university graduation. The one I missed because the e-prescription module had failed the night before a compliance audit. I never told her how guilty I felt. How I sat in the dark server room that day watching her valedictorian speech on a 3G connection with spotty audio. I kept telling myself, "It's okay, you're doing something that matters." But looking back now, I wonder, was it worth being so invisible for so long? The next morning, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Eric Bao on my front steps. He looked exhausted, tie crooked, dark circles under his eyes. A man who had finally realized the storm he'd walked into. "Martin," he began, trying to sound composed. "Thanks for seeing me." I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let him in. He took a seat, gripping his coffee mug too tightly. "We're having significant difficulties with the transition. Helix's platform isn't fully compatible with some of your, legacy modifications. Legacy. They always say that word like it's a curse. Yesterday, oncology lost access to their treatment protocols. The day before that, billing and compliance systems froze. We're under state review now. Things are falling apart. I nodded slowly. Sounds like the modernization is going well, I said. He flinched at the sarcasm. I'm prepared to offer you a 6-month consulting contract. Double your old rate. We need you to help us fix this. I looked at him for a long moment. I'm afraid I've already accepted another position. He blinked. Where? Riverside. His face paled. Martin, that's a direct competitor. Yes. There's a non-compete in your severance package. There's a non-disclosure. No non-compete, I said calmly. My lawyer checked. He sank deeper into the chair, the weight of reality crashing down. Is this revenge, he whispered. Is this about making us suffer? I stood and walked to the door. No, this is about finding a place that values 17 years of dedication, not one that throws it away for a consulting brochure. As I held the door open, I saw the recognition in his face finally. The system he thought he could replace in a month took me a lifetime to build. By the time Eric walked out of my house, the damage was already done. But it wasn't just technical, it was institutional. I didn't ask him to leave. I didn't shout. I didn't demand an apology. I simply closed the door and stood there in silence. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something else, something deeper. Clarity. Because for 17 years I had given everything to St. Anselm. Not just time, not just energy. Sacrifice. My wife's final months. My daughter's milestones. My health. All placed second to the unspoken promise, if you hold the line will hold you. But it didn't. And now that the system had begun to collapse, only then did they understand that what I built wasn't just infrastructure. It was integrity translated into code. The next morning I checked my email. 17 unread messages, all from St. Anselm. The last one dropped all pretense. Martin, name your rate. Please, we need your help before this becomes a crisis we can't contain. It already was. Around noon, I received a call from Dr. Zhang, Director of Technology at Riverside Medical. She didn't waste words. St. Anselm's board reached out to me. A woman named Dr. Evelyn Huang, head of surgery. She wanted to confirm your appointment with us. I nodded instinctively, straightening my posture. She also wanted me to know something, Zhang added. What I asked. Her voice turned more serious. Your termination wasn't just a personnel decision. Blake Bao had been working with Helix Solutions for months behind the scenes, long before the board even voted. My stomach sank. He didn't mention that during any official transition planning. That's because he didn't plan to involve you. According to Dr. Huang, Helix promised the board massive savings, 22% reduction in annual IT spending if they switched to proprietary systems. And if the plan succeeded, Eric Bao would receive a performance bonus, a 6-figure one. There it was. Not modernization. Monetization. I sat in my home office staring at the framed system diagrams on my wall. Not for pride, for preservation. Because I'd spent almost 2 decades building something that worked, really worked. And now it was being gutted like an old warehouse. Not because it failed, but because it didn't fit someone else's narrative. That evening, an email arrived from Dr. Evelyn Huang herself. Martin, I owe you an apology. The board approved the Helix restructuring plan based on incomplete and misleading information. We now know that the legacy systems you maintained were not only stable, they exceeded industry benchmarks in uptime, compliance, and security. We were shown false comparisons, doctored metrics, and exaggerated failure risks. I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. I'd like to invite you to attend and share your side of the story, no obligation. But many of us believe it's time the truth was heard. I read her words again, slowly, carefully. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about what happens when people mistake quiet excellence for obsolescence. When they forget that institutional memory can't be replicated with consultants and whiteboards. So I replied, I'll be there. The next morning I arrived at St. Anselm for the first time in 3 weeks. Not through the staff entrance, not with a badge, but through the front lobby, head-high, laptop in hand. In the boardroom, I saw familiar faces: Dr. Lin, Evelyn. Heads of departments I had quietly supported for over a decade. Eric arrived last, eyes widening when he saw me at the table. Kevin Tran trailed behind him, no longer checking his phone, no longer confident. This time I wasn't in the background. I was the agenda. Dr. Hoang began the meeting with poise. We are here to evaluate the consequences of our current system transition. Multiple departments have reported instability. We're diverting emergency patients. And the State Compliance Office has opened an investigation. She turned to me. Mr. Vu has graciously agreed to share his perspective. Martin, please. I nodded, plugged in my laptop, clicked the first slide. A real-time map of the system infrastructure I had built. This is the heartbeat of St. Anselm, I began. Every module, every connection, every failsafe custom-built, tested, and adapted over 17 years. These aren't outdated systems, they are specialized solutions. I advanced to the next slide, Helix's technical white paper, highlighted in red known incompatibilities with legacy, pharmacy systems, diagnostics, and insurance portals. Helix works great for brand new hospitals built entirely on their architecture. But retrofitting onto existing systems, it requires years of planning and adaptation. And none of that happened here, Eric interrupted. We were told the compatibility issues would be minimal. I turned to him, pulling up a staff email from 2 months ago. You directed department heads to emphasize vulnerability and minimize stability. Metrics correct. He froze. The room went silent. This wasn't a transition, I said. It was a calculated erasure. Dr. Lin spoke next. In the past 10 days, we've diverted 61 patients, delayed 4 critical surgeries, and lost access to over 200-300 patient records, even temporarily. Her voice trembled not with anger, but with disbelief. That's not a modernization plan. That's a system failure. The vote was held 20 minutes later. Unanimous. The Helix contract would be terminated immediately. The original system would be reinstated. And a task force would oversee full restoration under new leadership. I began packing up my laptop. But before I could close the lid, Dr. Hoang approached me. Martin, we have one more proposal, if you're willing to hear it. I looked up. We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer. Full authority. Full support. To rebuild this hospital system with the care it deserves. I paused, not because I didn't know my answer, but because I wanted the moment to settle. Then I nodded. I'm ready. 3 weeks later, I walked through the front entrance of St. Anselm Medical Center, not as a visitor, not as a former employee, but as Chief Technology Officer. I wore a new badge, but the halls were the same. Nurses passing with tired smiles, administrators rushing between departments, monitors chiming softly in the background. Yet something had changed. This time when people saw me, they didn't glance away or nod politely. They stopped, smiled, some clapped, others just said, "Welcome back, Mr. Vu, we're glad you're here." The same people who once leaned on me without realizing it, now they knew. Now they understood what I had done in the shadows year after year. But rebuilding wasn't going to be easy. Helix hadn't just failed to integrate, they had dismantled critical infrastructure on their way out. Some modules were corrupted, others overwritten. Entire log chains were missing from the insurance database. And the worst part, their cloud migration was incomplete. Backups were fragmented across servers they'd spun up and never properly synced. For a moment, even I felt overwhelmed. But I had something they didn't. Memory. I knew the logic trees by heart. The emergency overrides. The handshake protocols written back when our network was still running on second-hand Cisco hardware. So I built a team, a hybrid one. Half were trusted former staff people like Trang Allen and Dr. Lin. The other half, fresh eyes, curious minds, people who'd grown up with cloud-first thinking but were willing to learn the history behind the wires. It wasn't about going backward. It was about rebuilding forward on a foundation that actually worked. One of the first meetings I ran as CTO was different from the ones I used to sit in. No one interrupted. No one checked their watch. Everyone listened. I presented a 5-phase restoration plan. Redundancy first, then interface relinking, then testing. Only after that would we discuss modernization, not before. I said, we can talk about dashboards and UX later. Right now, we rebuild the heartbeat. There were nods, serious faces. People finally understood what was at stake. The weeks passed quickly, but every hour was heavy. We worked through weekends, restored backups at 3 a.m., sat in radiology closets, rerouting cabling that had been cut and left hanging. But then came a moment I'll never forget. One Tuesday morning, Nurse Thao from cardiology walked into the command room. Just wanted to say records loaded in 2 seconds flat this morning, she smiled. Felt like magic. I didn't say much, just smiled back. But inside, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Pride. Not the loud kind. The quiet, grounded kind, the kind that comes from seeing your work breathe again. Eric Bao was no longer at St. Anselm. The official announcement said he was pursuing new opportunities. I didn't ask for his removal. I didn't need to. His own decisions wrote that ending. Last I heard, he'd taken a role with a digital health startup promising revolutionary disruption. Some people learn from failure, others just rebrand it. One afternoon, I stopped by the nurses' station in oncology. My daughter had dropped off lunch for me earlier that day. She worked nearby now, visited often. We were rebuilding too. I sat there for a while, sipping tea, watching the hum of the hospital around me. Nurse Beach handed me a sticky note with a smile. Reminder, you're not allowed to fix things alone anymore. I laughed, genuinely. That night, as I walked the quiet halls, I passed a small server closet in the east wing. I unlocked it, stepped inside. And there it was, the original backup drive I had hidden years ago just in case. Still secure, still untouched. I placed a hand on it, not to use it, but to remember. The past wasn't broken, it was buried beneath noise. In the boardroom, I now had a permanent seat. Not in the corner, not behind a laptop, at the table. The quarterly review was coming up. I had slides prepared, clean, honest metrics. No inflation, no dramatics. When Dr. Evelyn Huang opened the meeting, she turned to me. Mr. Vu, we're eager to hear how your team is progressing. I stood, connected my laptop to the screen, and clicked through the slides. System stability, 99.94% restored. Data integrity, 98.7% pending one final reconciliation. Critical workflows, all live. No downtime for 22 consecutive days. The room stayed quiet, focused. I clicked to the last slide, a roadmap. 5 years. Modernization with purpose, not pressure. We won't chase trends. We'll pursue what works. Real innovation builds on reliability, not at its expense. This time I didn't need to prove anything. The data spoke, but more importantly, they listened. Later that week, we held a staff appreciation dinner. Nothing fancy, just food, laughter, and the kind of warmth that only exists when people have fought through something together. There was a plaque on the table for restoring not just the system, but the trust behind it. My team veterans and newcomers stood beside me for a photo. I looked at them, really looked. They weren't resources. They were the soul of this hospital. And now they were finally seen. When I got home that night, I stepped out onto the balcony with a cup of tea. The sky was soft with clouds, the city humming in the distance. My phone buzzed. A message from Jiang Thu at Riverside. Heard you earned the Regional Healthcare Tech Excellence Award. Congrats, almost colleague. I smiled. Thanks, no hard feelings. I landed where I was meant to. She replied, they're lucky to have you. Most systems don't get a second chance. Most people don't either. And she was right. Because the truth is, I hadn't come back for revenge. I came back for restoration. Not of power, but of truth. That experience matters. That loyalty has weight. That quiet, dependable work deserves more than polite applause on your way out the door. It deserves a seat at the table. 6 months had passed since I returned to St. Anselm Medical Center. The servers no longer hummed with errors. The backup systems were fully redundant. Downtime zero in the past 90 days. But that wasn't what I was most proud of. What mattered was how people moved through the building again. Calm, confident, uninterrupted. Nurses didn't worry about patient files disappearing mid-treatment. Surgeons didn't lose time waiting for radiology results to load. Administrators didn't have to call AT every other hour. They trusted the system again because the system was once again being run by someone who understood what was at stake. The staff didn't look at me like a tech guy anymore. They looked at me like someone who'd shown up when it mattered, someone who stayed when others failed, someone who fought not with ego but with care. And honestly, that was enough. For the first time in over 17 years, I no longer felt invisible. One morning, as I was preparing for the annual review presentation, my daughter Mai stopped by my office. She handed me a small envelope. Open it after your meeting, she smiled. Then she paused. Dad, I know I used to get upset when you missed things. Birthdays, graduation, even my first job interview. She hesitated. But now I get it. You weren't choosing work over me. You were choosing to protect something that protected all of us. I didn't say anything, just reached for her hand. Some truths don't need to be explained anymore. They just need to be shared. Later that day, I presented our technology roadmap to the hospital's board of directors. I showed them clean metrics, no spin, no fluff. I outlined not just how we'd modernize, but why each step mattered. Why patient care came before dashboards. Why integration wasn't about trends, but trust. When I finished, Dr. Hoying looked around the room and said, "Martin, thank you for restoring our systems, but more importantly, for restoring our perspective." They voted to approve the next 5-year investment plan unanimously. No debate, no amendments, just trust. That weekend, I finally opened the envelope Mai had given me. Inside was a photo, an old one, a candid snapshot of me at a server rack, cables everywhere, sweat on my brow, and a smile I didn't even know I had. On the back, she had written, "You were always here, even when I didn't see it. I see it now." I sat quietly for a long time after reading it. Sometimes, the healing doesn't come from a boardroom or a contract. Sometimes it comes from your child finally seeing who you are. The recognition plaque for our department sat near my desk. It wasn't flashy, just brass on wood, in honor of the team who brought the system and the heart back online. I looked at it each morning, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Not of the battles I fought, but of the values I refused to surrender. Every so often, I think about Eric Bao. The last I heard, he joined a digital health venture in Ho Chi Minh City, redesigning the future of healthcare according to their press release. Maybe he believes in what he's doing. Maybe he's learned something, or maybe not. But I don't check in on him, not out of spite, but because he's not part of my story anymore. I'm not looking back. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I found myself alone in the East Wing, where we once had the oldest server closet in the hospital. The door had been replaced, the floors redone. But I remembered every outlet, every wire, every manual override I used to test during night shifts. 17 years of quiet preparation. 17 years of being the one who never let things fall apart. I stood there for a moment. Then I whispered something I hadn't allowed myself to say not until now. "You did good, Martin, and they finally know it." That night I sat on my balcony. The city lights shimmered through the mist. Steam rose from my cup of tea. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Zhang Thu at Riverside Medical. "Final board results are in. You beat us for the National Award. Best Healthcare Technology Leadership 2025. Couldn't have gone to anyone more deserving." I smiled, then typed, "Thank you, Zhang. You were right. Some systems don't get second chances. I did. And I didn't waste it." She responded, "Some of us don't just restore systems, Martin. We restore people's belief in what they thought was lost." I looked up at the sky, the clouds soft, the air still. She was right. Because what I got back wasn't just a job, or a title, or a seat at the table. What I got back was my voice. What I rebuilt wasn't just code. It was dignity, belonging, peace. So no, this was never about revenge. I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted the truth to stand. That experience isn't disposable. That loyalty has a cost. That people who give everything behind the scenes deserve more than silence when it all goes right. They deserve to be remembered when it nearly goes wrong. And sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is simply walk back in, fix what they broke, and leave the door open behind you. Not for them, but for the next person who needs someone to believe in.